Here are the fabrics that I bought and pre-washed yesterday. I, of course, ironed all of them after they were washed and dried. This light green is my bias fabric that I've already cut into 2-inch strips that I will get ready after I'm done piecing. This is the background fabric that I'm not going to do anything with until I finish the quilt top. This is the main color, dark brown. I have 40 4-inch squares of that. And then of each of the green, I cut out 8. And each of the pinks, I cut out 12 of each, because there's going to be 3 rows of the pink zigzags and 2 rows of the green zigzags. And now what I'm doing today is I am taking the dark brown squares and I am writing on the diagonal for them. I now have each of the brown neutral squares with the lines on them matched up to another colored square, either pink or green. And what I will be doing now is using my 1/4 inch measurement and going down each line with each side of the line with a 1/4 inch seam. When I get to the end, I'm not going to cut it off. I'm going to lift my foot and pull out a little bit and put in the next square. Lining it up. And this way I'm going to make a chain of my squares. And when I get to the last one in my chain, I'm going to pull out a little bit, flip the whole chain around, make sure that your thread is underneath your foot, and start down the other side of the white line. And when you get to the end and you cut it off, you can see that they're all hooked together in a chain. You can take your scissors and simply cut them off, and you have your nice squares. If you open up each side of the square, you have a beautiful diagonal square, and you'll get 2 slightly smaller squares out of each larger one. Here are my 4 stacks of fabrics of these squares that I cut. You can see both of the seams on the backs of each of these. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip them over and cut to make 2 smaller squares. Here's my square that I'm going to cut. I'm going to use the white mark that I already made, or you just know that you're cutting from corner to corner on that diagonal in between the 2 seams that you sewed. So here have your two pieces. We are going to press them open. I press my seams to one side usually because I like the extra strength that that offers. And if you flip it over, press that seam good and open. And then you cut off these two extra pieces that are overhang. And again for the other one, press the seams to one side. I'm pressing them all to the brown so that I can remember to press them the same direction. And there you have your two squares. Today we are going to lay out all of our squares into the overall pattern of the quilt. But before we start with that, I thought I'd show you all the different things that 4 of our squares, with the neutral on one side and the color on the other side, they can make lots of different squares that could create fun patterns for quilts. So I came up with 7, and I'm sure that there's more and different variations. There's those 2 arrows pointing at each other. That, I believe, is an hourglass or a lantern shape. This one is called Flying Geese. It makes a fun pattern for a whole quilt. And then there's the chevron that we're going to be using for this quilt. There's a pinwheel pattern. There's some arrows all pointing in the same direction. And then there's diamonds. Thought I might give you an idea of some of the fun stuff that you can do with just 4 of those little squares. Today we are taking all of the squares that we've made over the last couple days and laying them out the way we want them on the quilt top. As you can see, I have 5 rows of 4 chevrons each to make up this really cute zigzag pattern for the quilt top. Now down here at the bottom, I've taken, and I think this is pretty cool, each square is exactly the same. You notice the same 4 squares laid out the exact same way make 1 row of blocks. And so 4 blocks in each row make up the zigzag pattern from the chevron pattern. So what we are going to do now is we're going to take 4 at a time and make these smaller squares into larger blocks. Right now we're going to take each square, we're going to sew the top 2 together and the bottom 2 together, and then we'll sew the 2 halves together along this long middle seam to make the whole square. We're not going to worry about matching up all the edges, because after we get the seams all looking good, we're going to square up the edges and cut off the extra pieces that hang over. Here we've got the top 2 pieces of the square. We're going to line up the seams as close as we can get them because we want the points to come together cleanly. We're going to sew the top 2 together first. And then open it up. See how beautiful that is. Enough for a seam to connect to the previous row. Here's the bottom 2 squares. Right sides together. Seams matching up. Top and the bottom. open it up. You see how they come clean together. And then after we iron, we will sew them across. I'm going to pin them together once they're ironed so that the seams will line up easier when I'm sewing. Here are the tops and bottoms of the chevron squares, all sewn together down the middle seam of each. At this point in the project, I was more concerned about matching up the points than I was about making sure that all of the edges matched. And if you look at some of them, you can see that the edges don't all match up. These here are, I'm just showing from the back how I press the seams. The top seams I press to the left, and the bottom seams I press to the right, so that it's not as bulky. And when I do the machine quilting, it'll hold down these seams. Here I have the top half of the bottom half of the square. I pinned it down so that the seams would stay lined up better and the center points would be crisper. We are going to sew all the way across that middle seam. And as we remove the pins, we can open it up and see how everything lines up beautifully, all in the middle. And so all we have left to do with this square is to square up the edges so that everything comes together evenly on the sides when we put the larger squares together. Here are the first two squares that I finished sewing together. I haven't squared them up yet, and I'll show you how to do that when I finish sewing together all the squares. Just a quick recap. You're going to sew the top two together. You're going to sew the bottom two together. Then you're going to sew the top to the bottom. Take time and pin, even if you don't usually pin, because it will make the seams cleaner and the corners sharper on your final zigzag pattern. Now I'm squaring up my chevron patches, and what I want is I'm going to be cutting off a little bit from each side. I want each square to measure 3 1/4 of an inch from the center seam to the edge. So I'm just using my quilter's rule, lining up the 3 1/4 inch marks all the way along the center seam and trimming off. Most, I'm finding, are pretty much matching up, and I'm just getting a little thready. Some of the sides are not quite there, but they're like less than 1/8 of an inch off, and so I'm not worried about it. Everything will turn out okay in the final one, because the edges that you're matching them up to, you can line them up. 3 1/4. See, the only thing sticking out there is a little bit of the seam, and 3 1/4 on the bottom. And then you have, and the reason it's important to mark from the center of the square is so that it's even on all 4 sides, so that you're not having something that's slightly diagonal or slightly skewed. So 3 1/4 inch from each of the seams.
Thank you for watching this video. If you like what you saw, please take a second to click the like button now and to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, please check out my blog at www.areformedheathen.blogspot.com. Happy crafting!